Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Money Badger channel, and welcome to my very first stock pick of the week video. Now before I begin, I want to disclose a couple of things. First and foremost, these stock picks are my opinions. I like to think that they are very well-educated opinions, but they're my opinions nonetheless. So that means that at the end of the day, it's my responsibility to you to give you not just the pros, but even the cons of these particular companies that I'm looking at. The other thing I want to make you aware of is that one stock is not the end-all be-all. The key to a truly well-crafted portfolio is, first and foremost, and will always be, diversification. This means that you should always have an array of stocks or indexes that are in completely unrelated industries. By the way, I'm always going to try to not focus on just one industry. I'm always going to try to find certain stocks that are in different industries, and I'll always let you know what industries and market sectors these fall into. And finally, because of so much economic uncertainty and a lot of market volatility these last few months, I believe it is absolutely vital that you be extra diligent in focusing on what your portfolio is currently invested in. So with that being said, if you're not 100% sure about a specific stock or an index that you're currently in, let me know in the comments down below and I'd be happy to take a look at it for you. And who knows, you might give me a stock or an index that might end up being a stock pick of the week. And finally guys, if you like the content that I'm putting out on this channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and hit the like button on this video. Alright, the moment you've all been waiting for. My very first stock pick for you is Amazon. I'm just kidding, it's not going to be Amazon. While I do believe that there is some value in talking about companies and stocks like Amazon, Microsoft, Boeing, at the end of the day, I feel like it would be cheating you if I just talked about companies and stocks that everybody already knows about. So rather than talking about a company that everybody knows about, I'm going to talk about a company that a lot of people don't know about, which I've actually been monitoring for some time now, and that is not Amazon, but it's a company called Edwards Life Sciences. Edwards Life Sciences, or Edwards for short, was founded back in 1958, and they are a medical technology company that focuses on heart disease. Specifically, they specialize in artificial heart valve devices and, what drew me to them, hemodynamic monitoring. So they are a company that is in the healthcare space, specifically healthcare equipment and devices, and they are a member of the S&P 500. Now, before I dive deeper into Edwards Life Sciences, let me go ahead and give you some statistics as to why they're in such a good space. According to the American Heart Association, 116.4 million people have hypertension in America. Every 38 seconds in the United States, someone dies of cardiovascular related diseases. That equates to about 2,400 people a day. So there's clearly a demand when it comes to solutions for cardiovascular related diseases. Now, I also mentioned hemodynamic monitoring, which I'll dive into a little bit later, but the other thing that I want to make you aware of statistically is sepsis. According to the CDC, each year 1.7 million Americans develop sepsis. Of that 1.7 million, 270,000 of them die. And finally, 1 in 3 patients that are hospitalized at a hospital die of sepsis. And you may be wondering, what is sepsis and what does that have to do with anything? I'll get to that. So as I said before, Edwards specializes in artificial heart valves. For those of you that don't know, there are valves within the chamber of your heart that help with making sure that your circulatory system and blood flows efficiently. If those valves are damaged, it can be incredibly detrimental to your health and could eventually kill you. So Edwards has patented artificial heart valves that they can use to surgically replace your heart valves. But the other big thing that they have within their product line are basically what are known as transcatheter aortic and pulmonary valves. The Sapien 3 product line, which is their patented transcatheter aortic system, is by and large their biggest product line, and when it comes from a market perspective, this is where they are the most dominant in the space. Without diving too deep into the technical science, the key here is that people who have damage or blockage in their aorta or pulmonary and arterial systems, these transcatheter systems allow for those certain vessels to work efficiently. It's really important to note that if you actually have blockage or damage to your aorta, that can kill you immediately. I truly cannot emphasize enough that this technology, not only is it significantly innovative, but it is absolutely necessary for people and it is life-saving. Now, like I said, the thing that attracted me most to Edwards Life Science was something known as their hemodynamic monitoring department. Basically what this is they created a patented device to watch people's blood pressure in real time. Now, I told you a little bit about sepsis earlier. My wife and a lot of people in the medical field are probably going to watch this and say that I botch some of the details, but in short, sepsis is when a bacterial infection gets into your bloodstream and your body actually tries to fight the infection, but because it's in your bloodstream and it's so prolific throughout your body, the body tries to attack it systemically, causing inflation all throughout your body, which then in turn leads to multiple organ failure. Sepsis is a very big deal in hospitals and in general, and the key is that sepsis can happen at any time, so monitoring the symptoms is a big factor. And by and large, the most common way to know if someone goes into sepsis oftentimes is to monitor their blood pressure. So if you have a device that is monitoring someone's blood pressure in real time, you can then react to someone having sepsis a lot faster. When I learned that this is a part of what Edwards Life Sciences did, I was all in on it because I understood a little bit of the value of this type of device. So that's a little bit about Edwards Life Sciences, the company. They're a multi-billion-dollar medical device company that is very dominant in their space. So let's talk a little bit about their stock. And the first thing that I always like to see is, are they making money? And to do that, we have to look at their financial statement. I'm not going to dive too deep into the details of the financial statement because that's somewhat boring to people, but I'm going to give the highlights of some of the things I like to look at when I look at the financial condition of a company. Now, another thing to be aware of is I use Fidelity for my investments. They're a really good custodian and they have a lot of really good market-related information out there for you. As you can see, Edwards Life Sciences, as of May 18th, was sitting at $216.43 a stock. That is a little over 87% of its all-time high, which was back in November of 2019, sitting at $247.64. If you were to look at the 10-year trajectory of the stock, if you were to purchase this stock back in 2010, you would have nearly increased your investment by tenfold. Bit of a side story here. Back when I was in graduate school getting my MBA in finance, I was also a portfolio manager for the university's endowment. I was in charge of the healthcare sector, and I actually proposed Edwards Life Sciences back in 2017. When I proposed it, the stock was sitting at $97. This endowment still holds this stock today. You're welcome, Smokey. So let's dive into some numbers starting with earnings. Historically, with the exception of Q4 of 2019, Edwards Life Sciences has been able to meet or beat every quarter of its earnings estimates. Their most recent earnings report was actually a few weeks ago, back on April 23rd, and they were able to beat the earnings estimate by a total of 6 cents. 20 analysts were on average estimating about 45 cents earnings per share, when the actual earnings per share was 50 cents. Now, if you look at Q2 of 2020, which comes out in July, you will see that the analysts are predicting an estimate of 17 cents, which is significantly less. And guys, that is by and large the biggest concern when it comes to Edwards Life Sciences right now, or even just the healthcare sector in general because of the pandemic situation. Q2 of 2020 for Edwards Life Sciences will reflect how they performed during the height of the pandemic. And as we know, there were a lot of surgeries that were put off. The main idea is that because hospitals deferred and canceled a lot of surgeries, that Edwards Life Sciences devices were not used nearly as much. And in turn, a lot of surgeons and hospitals did not buy their products as much. So at the end of the day, it's kind of a wait and see game to see how badly or how well they did relative to what analysts think. Now, a lot of companies are in this situation, and when it comes to the Q2 earnings, we are going to see a lot of the effects of what happened during the pandemic crisis. And that just doesn't apply to Edwards, that applies to everybody. If we dive deeper into the financial statement, specifically the income statement, you will see that Edwards Life Sciences in 2019 had by and large its best year with over $4 billion in sales, and after all operating and non-operating expenses, they finally broke into the net income of $1 billion. This is a huge jump from 2015, where they didn't even crack 500 million. A lot of the growth that has happened in Edwards Life Sciences over the last 5 years has driven predominantly by their further exposure into the European market and beyond. If you look at the first quarter of 2020 compared to the last quarter of 2019, you will see that in gross sales they made a little bit less, but they were still able to make more on the net income component because of efficiency and cost. The last thing that we're really going to focus on are some market statistics. And we're not only just going to look at these statistics, we're also going to compare them to the healthcare equipment sector in general. The first thing we're going to highlight is market capitalization, or market cap. Basically, this is calculated by taking all of the shares outstanding and multiplying it by the amount per share, or that $260 that we looked at earlier. By looking at this number, we can see how strong Edwards Life Science is to weather through strong economic cycles. As you can see, from a market cap compared compared to the healthcare equipment sector, Edwards' market cap is more than double what the industry average is. The next thing we're going to look at is some growth and profit margin statistics. And the reality is that based on the 10-year trend, you kind of already know that a lot of this growth and profit margins are going to look really good, but let's dive into it a little bit deeper. Now, it's very self-evident when you look at just the green plus numbers that Edwards has done very well for itself, but one thing in particular to highlight and to be very aware of, especially if you were to buy into this today, is the projected earnings per share growth. As you can see, the projected earnings per share growth is not nearly as good as the healthcare equipment sector in general. Now, of course, in the healthcare equipment sector, you've got a lot of different companies that are innovating and growing into this space, and so there's a lot of growth there, whereas Edwards Lifesciences is a well-established company that is expanding within the space geographically while also looking at innovating in new devices. The key there is that they are pretty dominant, and so there's this idea that analysts think that they won't grow nearly as much in some of the other innovators within the space. But to the same coin, those that are in that innovative healthcare equipment space could also go bust, and so there's a lot of reward potential there, but there's also a lot of risk. The key with Edwards is that they have a lot of growth potential from a geographic and new device and innovative space, but they're more secure because of where they're established today. Gross margin looks excellent. EBIT margin. EBIT, by the way, is earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation. So that margin looks really good. And finally, their profit, operating margin, pre-tax, everything looks good from a profit margin perspective. Their profits look good. What can I say? As you can see, from a return perspective, they're very strong compared to the healthcare equipment sector in general. And again, the big reason for this here is because there's a lot of companies in that space that are innovating, but those projects and companies could go bust. And that is a risk you have to take into play when you are picking a particular stock. And just to hammer onto that point even further, when you look at their debt ratios, obviously you can see that they are not nearly as levered as some of the other companies within the healthcare equipment sector. If you take their long-term debt and divide it by the amount of equity that they have in the company, that is where these ratios come from. So this long-term debt to equity, 16.67% compared to 90%. That basically tells me that on average, the healthcare equipment sector is incredibly levered. There's not a whole lot of equity and there's a lot of debt associated to them. Edwards has done incredibly well managing their debt while growing organically. Now, as always, we want to make sure that the companies we're looking at are doing well now and moving forward. One of the key highlights in the news and events section is that Edwards Lifesciences transcatheter systems just received expanded approval, or a CE mark, in Europe. Basically, this allows them to use their devices in Europe, which is good. We want Edwards Lifesciences to continue to grow within the European space. Now, off to the right of the screen, you will see a summary score, which basically gives them a score of 9.5 out of 10. That's a good number to see. I don't care much about that number because at the end of the day, it's the opinion of other analysts. And what matters to us is that we have our own personal informed opinion rather than just banking on what somebody else's opinion was. If everybody just went off of analyst opinions, then no one would be buying Tesla right now. Oh, Tesla. That's a video for another time. The last thing I want to leave you guys with is a recommendation, because at the end of the day, you like to know the stock pick, but you also want to know, would I buy this now? There's obviously concerns when it comes to the healthcare sector right now because of where the pandemic is, and when it comes to the space that they're in right now, if people start to defer more surgeries, then obviously people are not going to use their devices. On top of that, I know that it's a very expensive stock, and it's very close to this 52-week high, but the reality is that because of everything I just mentioned, when it comes to their dominant space, as well as the growth that they're doing in Europe and throughout the world, I still believe that they are a very strong company and they can be a good addition to anyone's portfolio. So if I were to put a recommendation, I would put it to a definite hold to a small buy. If you already hold Edwards, I would definitely continue to hold it because of that growth and because of those drivers. But if you wanted to buy into it, I would not overexpose yourself to just Edwards. I would have it just be a small portion of your portfolio just to be there for that extra diversification. Well, guys, there it is, my very first stock pick of the week to you. I hope this was really informative to you, and if you like some of the suggestions or if you have questions or thoughts about everything that I talked about with Edwards, please feel free to leave a like and comments down below. And if you have a particular stock you want me to take a look at or possibly make a video on, you let me know in the comments down below as well. And as always, guys, if you like the content I'm putting out on this channel and you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe, hit the like button on this video, and ring the bell to turn on notifications. And for those of you that are already subscribed and like the video, you are my people. Badger out.